Welcome to Round Hill Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we talk about. We talk about faith. Hey, Ed.
Hey, Leslie.
How's it going?
It's going fine. How about you?
Good. Week 19.
Week 19.
We're
Excited.
in Mark. You've given me a break from the KJV, which I appreciate.
Yeah, the King James Version has given you a good
little tongue twister.
Run for your money.
It's good. Oh, yeah. Well, and as we say in choir a lot, words are hard. So I'm not sure it's really KJV's fault at that point. And so our reading for this week is Mark 14, 3 through 9, and we'll dive in. While Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard. And she broke open the jar and poured the ointment on his head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, "Why was the ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and the money given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." I love that last line, "will be told in remembrance of her," because I always think of him saying in remembrance of me, et cetera, et cetera. I like this, in remembrance of her.
And I don't think he says that about anyone else ever.
She's the only one.
So it's a truly significant moment.
She's very special.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I see some modern connections we could make with the indignation of the other people.
Yes.
Well, that could have been given to the poor.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, that is a true statement. Were they giving things to the poor? It's a question that might have.
That's a good question.
That whole section reeks a little bit of hypocrisy. I'm just going to say it.
Yes, it does. Yep. There's actually, this is a beautiful passage, right? But there's a lot here that's very troubling.
Okay.
So part of what's troubling is their response to her generosity. Why was the ointment wasted in this way? I mean, it's not, why was it used in this way?
Right.
Could we not have found a better use for it? But why was it wasted? That's a really harsh word.
Yeah.
We're finally Jesus is going to get a moment here. No, he's not, right? His closest friends are going to shut that down. And then your question, could have been sold for more than 300 denarii. Don't know exactly what that translates to, but probably a significant sum.
Sure.
Right? And the money given to the poor, your point, was this a regular practice that was already happening, or did somebody just kind of, bring this up out of the blue?
All right.
There are other versions of this story, but same theme, it's that they're not particularly happy about it. And so, and then of course the thing is, the way that Jesus receives it is in anticipation of his death.
Right.
And it's interesting because, when she comes forward, a woman came with an alabaster jar, so very expensive, right? To have an alabaster jar, for one thing, a very costly ointment of nard, maybe a perfume substance that comes from India, possibly. So this is an area where there's a trade route, so people going back and forth, maybe that's how she gets it. And poured the ointment on his head. That's pretty much what she does. There's not really a reason assigned to it. But she has done, he says, she has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. So you wonder, is this his interpretation of it? Is that really what she intended? But I truly, I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. So it's just some odd pieces to it.
Yeah.
In the midst of this really beautiful moment where he receives this blessing, in a sense, from this woman.
Right. And
so
it feels like I'm assuming some who were there, are we assuming the sort of disciples were probably the some?
Yeah. And so I think at these meals, you get the sense that it's a mixed crowd.
Okay.
We have Simon the leper,
Right.
who has that's his home. Maybe some neighbors, some disciples, or all the disciples. I get the sense that whenever Jesus sat down, there's quite a mixed group around.
Okay.
Like, people that just said, I
Yeah.
want to check this out.
Yeah. Yeah.
The uninvited.
Yeah. Sure.
But yes, I think it's safe to say that they're there, and they're the ones who are, grumble, grumble, grumble.
Grumble, grumble, grumble. So it's so interesting that it feels like the language they're using is very much to sort of put themselves above her. And I don't think it's so much of a leap to assume at that time there was some gender dynamics at play.
I would think so.
One would think so. And so the way that they're just like,
Yeah.
like it's so, come on. And I also think, whether we don't know anything about her beyond this, do we?
No.
I mean, this could be like her prized possession. She could be a wealthy person. We have no idea.
Yep.
I mean, I could imagine they would probably treat her the same no matter what. So,
Indeed.
so I think it's interesting to be, that she has this thing. She has, like you said, this jar, which on the jar itself is something special.
Yeah.
I think of the way of like a beautiful perfume bottle. If people keep them because they're beautiful,
Yeah, and she broke open the jar.
Yeah.
That's sort of a stunning image in and of itself.
Yeah. I'm imagining like a wax seal.
Yeah. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, it's cool. It's like it's almost like a visceral feel. You can almost hear it,
Yeah. It's really an amazing moment. Does she have to do that? I mean, I've read something once about how these jars were sealed, and they were sealed in a very kind of definitive way so as to protect the contents. But, that's a stunning image that she breaks this thing.
It's like a piggy bank.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
piggy bank. It's like a child going, "Koosh."
Been saving this for a while,
Yeah.
and now it's time to open it up.
Yeah.
What's really interesting about this passage, and I think this is one of the reasons why I thought it was important to include it in the 52.
Yeah.
The way that, I'll just back up for a second. Thomas Merton, who was an American Roman Catholic monk, was a prolific writer and lived for most of his life in the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. And one of his books that he wrote was called The Wisdom of the Desert. And it was a story of men and women who basically checked out of society in the 4th century, so several hundred years after Jesus died, because they thought that Christianity was already compromising its core values. And while they were out there, these people depended somewhat on each other, these people who went out to the desert, and there were a lot of them. But part of what they were learning to do out there was to be kind of stripped away of all the social, cultural baggage.
Okay.
And it was to practice love. They really didn't go out to get away. They wanted to try to figure out, what does it mean to actually love the world, right? As God loves the world. And one of the things that Merton says is that what they discovered is that here they are living out in these caves in the desert. They actually had to be quite dependent on each other in some ways.
Okay.
And they learned there the lessons of humility, kindness, patience, and so on. So his point was that they didn't objectify love. They didn't just speak about it. They didn't talk about dedicating financial resources to someone. They actually sat with one another, helped one another, made food for one another when they were sick. And what comes across in this story, which was interesting to me, is that this woman has a direct physical relationship with Jesus. She brings this ointment, she pours it on his head. The disciples say, or somebody says, why was the ointment wasted in this way? Interesting that they talk about the personal connection as waste. For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and the money given to the poor. So there's a kind of, they've objectified the poor. The poor are out there somewhere.
Right.
We take our money, we give in that way.
Right.
Now, in our time, it turns out that supporting organizations that support those who are impoverished is a very impactful way to help people.
Okay.
But I think the church always elevates this idea that insofar as it's possible, we want to have this personal connection, a relational connection. We don't really go to serve, the poor, but it's how are we in relationship with others,
Sure.
right? Even if it is a gift to an organization, how is there just the awareness of the relationship at some level?
Right.
And some people might think, well, does it really make that much of a difference? Yeah. It can make a big difference. And a lot of the work that churches do is still personal. It's literally providing a meal to someone. And in many cases, I've worked with shelters and food banks over the years, and people provide food. They always say, hey, we hope that your folks will not just, come and deliver the meal. Come and stay. Come and sit down, get to know the people. That's kind of what I see happening here. Get past that just, sort of objectifying people.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting that, you say the poor and it feels just blatantly derogatory.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if you could say the same thing to the rich, like you're not really saying that that's not usually in a nice sentence. We group anyone as the blah. It kind of, there's faceless entities versus people who are in each of these groupings we're making as diverse as the next.
Yep. And that's what's happening here, right? Jesus and this woman, they're kind of in a face-to-face connection. Who are the poor? They're out there somewhere.
Right.
Right? But they're not defined.
But they're out there.
Yeah. And as long as we can give money to them,
right,
that sort of seals it. One of the things that in my experience over the years of having to interview for church positions, one of the things that I have found many times is that churches want to, rightly in some ways, they want to elevate this programs that they have that are helping them to be a force for good.
Okay.
One of the things that's always good to listen to, though, is that through those programs, are they also making any use of opportunities for personal connection? Like, well, through doing that, what did you learn from those whom you are seeking to serve? Right? What strengths did you tap together? What did you learn together while you were doing this thing? As opposed to, we bring the wisdom, we bring the resources, we bring our power, right? And then we do this. Jesus never operates that way, right? He's always drawing forth something from someone else. Right. That's the real exciting part of the ministry.
So I feel like you're kind of talking about that sort of like ego aggrandizing service thing of like, just to name the thing of like, you see like the white kids in a poor neighborhood of BIPOC people. And it's like, okay. And they're like, look at me.
Yeah.
And it's very look at me versus like you said, connection. And I think can be problematic despite, I think, having a kernel of good intention. I think it can get a little off track.
Well, I think one thing that happened during the pandemic, of course, was that a lot of mission trips for churches were shut down. They couldn't do that anymore. And it's interesting because part of what I've picked up is a lot of those mission trips have never restarted. Partly because it has been, when you think about it, putting a small group of people on a plane and flying them thousands of miles away, and it's not a great ecological decision. But the other part of it is that who was really being served? I think sometimes we think that it's a good thing to do that. And a lot of times those trips do provide wonderful connections going both ways. No question about it. But I do think that there were trips, because I actually studied this extensively before the pandemic as I was thinking about more and more opportunities for Round Hill Community Church. There was already a kind of drawing back that was happening even then, where a lot of the companies that actually provided those mission trips were starting to change their approaches because they were feeling that there was just too much of the sense that one group is bringing its everything into the equation, the other group isn't bringing anything. And that's really not what we see in the Gospels. There's this real intention on Jesus' part, not only to heal, but to, in some cases, he's affected, right, by the people he's directly affected. We've seen stories where he wound up changing his mind. So here's a case where he elevates this woman, right? He's not going to say this about his disciples.
Ironically, no.
Poor guys. But so isn't that interesting? Like, who's the helper here? I get the sense that Jesus is he's full of wonder and appreciation for the people that he meets. He doesn't see them as needy. And, it's tough in life when somebody sees you as impoverished, needy, in a deficit. That's not a healthy outlook. So I think a Jesus way of seeing is a way of seeing people for the way that they're already treasured, for the possible wisdom. And I will say, I learned this early on in my ministry. I was living for 3 months in a part of Edinburgh, Scotland, that's definitely not on the tourist trail. And it's a section of the city called Craigmillar. And Craigmillar, I think, had probably, maybe 40, 50,000 inhabitants, all jammed into some of the most unattractive public housing I have ever seen in my life. So I did youth work there for a summer. And while I was there, I happened to share a house with a young man who had grown up in Craigmillar. And, he was telling me that if you were from this part of the city and you applied for a job, you couldn't list Craigmillar as your address. You had to try to find somebody in another part of the city whose address you could use because it was immediately a strike against you. But during the 3 months that I was there, he took me around to meet all of these people in Craigmillar. And they were the most fascinating people I think I've ever met. They were so in love with their homes, with the area. They didn't see themselves living in a deprived housing scheme, which is the way it was always described in the Edinburgh papers. They saw themselves as being lifelong residents of a part of the city that was noted for its resilient inhabitants. That's how they would often put it. And life was very challenging in that part of the city. But it was just so exciting to see the initiatives they'd get underway, how they supported one another, their pride in their neighborhoods, which you would not have gathered from the media. And so, here's this great story where it's interesting that we don't know the name of this woman. It's been other versions of this story are told, and there's speculations about who she might be. But I guess in a way, she becomes sort of every woman, because there is no one name assigned to her, which makes you think that this is everybody. This is everybody's potential to be caring in this way and lavish. So
I love that.
Anyway.
I love that. We've been teaching Mary Bear about how to be kind.
Oh.
And she's been trying to do kind things.
I love it.
She'll go, that's not kind. And I'm like, no. She could do kind. So there's just thinking of her. There's just a very kind and compassionate, it's such an interesting thing, the capacity for people to genuinely connect with. And, there's this saying, there's a phrase that, I don't know if it's a Southern thing, but it's like to love on.
Oh, yes. I've heard the phrase. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where it's like, you're not just loving, you're loving on.
Yeah.
And it's like this almost like even more just like forward moving phrase. You're loving on them. And literally, she's like on his head. She's loving on Jesus.
Yeah. That's a great connection. It's perfect for this.
It's sort of.
Literally the love comes on the top of his head and sort of soaks down into his scalp, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, I guess if I could just make this connection, in terms of kindness, I think it was a few weeks ago I quoted Kurt Vonnegut, who said in his autobiography, that there's only one rule, and that is you got to be kind.
Yeah.
And I think that what I observe right now is that kindness is under attack. It's not seen as strength, right? So we're watching, I think, what's being played out in the world right now is this sense of, is kindness the power that's going to prevail? Or is there another kind of power that's going to prevail?
Yeah.
And in this story, I think it's great that Jesus is going to elevate her kindness as the greatest thing of all. So we have a litmus test. We have a bar here, and that's what we get to share with the world, right? That what Jesus observes and affirms.
I love that. I love that. You can literally put your big bookmark here and look at this every day and say, am I striving for this?
Yep.
Is this my is this kind of action, is this kind of intention my North Star today? And even it's just like this to me strikes me as like it's like half a page. It's short, it's distilled, it's something, it's relatively small, and she's mentioned very little, but it's just like this thing can live so large in our lives if we give it the kind of elevation that he does, that Jesus does in this story, that he's saying, no, this is a big deal, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this act might seem small, but it's not. And I was just thinking about this story in relationship to the one that we just explored the week before, which is, the story of Zacchaeus.
Oh, yeah.
And, here's Zacchaeus, who is now on the other side. He's the rich.
Yes.
Right? So now we're pushing in that direction, pushing against that label. And but Zacchaeus is somebody who sees the light because of the way that Jesus sees him. Right? Here he senses himself as being treasured. Now he gets a sense that he can treasure other people and how that's possible. And that had dramatic social ramifications, right? Because he gave away half of his holdings to the community. And so here's a woman who does this in her own generous way. And these stories are going to see us through these times. I think we just keep coming every day, put our hand on the story, try to soak it right into our skin, because this is what we really need at this time.
The strength of kindness.
The strength of kindness.
Let's all be kind to each other and find that strength in that. So thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.